Okay. All right, everybody. Thank you all for sitting down and coming in to trust that I have something to say, but really I'm hoping that you all have something to say because I'm going to kind of lay out I don't want to call it the groundwork, but in a sense, the framework, and then hopefully we can fill in the framework with a lot of good ideas, conversations, and so forth. We talk a lot of theoretical. We do a lot of theoretical talk. So to that end, I guess I'll tell you a bit about myself. My name is Kermit Harrison. I'm a philosophy teacher at a local college, so it's not to point out which one. The local college here, I teach philosophy. My specific areas of study are philosophy of race and philosophy of gender. So when we were talking in the last session, I was very interested in the race-gender conversation we had because there's a lot to it. It does require a pretty good, long, open dialogue with authentic folks wanting to really kind of check it out. And that's what I saw last time. So that was very good. I was happy. Hey, y'all come on in and have a seat. We're having a conversation we'd like you to be a part of. Okay, so that's me. Now, as far as what I think past the theoretical, though, is that the practical is really important. And part of what I really like about the Occupy movement is the practical doing, trying to get your ideas actually worked out. And for me personally, one of the things that Occupy has done for me is allow me to see across the world, not just our nation, but across the world, that there are a lot of people who are thinking about the same kind of stuff. Prior to this summer, I know a lot of people, to include myself, who were thinking it was a lot more, they were a lot more isolated in their ideas about it, not recognizing that there were a lot of people who are feeling a lot of similar stuff, thinking a lot of similar stuff. Okay, so then as we've seen, everybody has a good, strong feeling of wanting something to be different, but because everybody kind of envisions that a bit differently, we end up getting, you know, sometimes, I guess, slowed down, so to speak. Sometimes we're slowed down in the movement, and it slows a little bit because we're having to work out internal stuff first. In the last session, just a second ago, for instance, we were talking about the feminist movement, and it's interesting enough, in the feminist movement, it was slowed down right in the 70s by racist issues, and you had a split where you had the feminist movement split from the womanist movement is what ended up happening, and that took a while before folks recognized, look, it's not going to be the case that any large group is going to have what they call monolithic thought, and it's not going to be the case that everybody in a group is all going to think the same thing, nor do you want everybody in the group to all think the precise same thing. So, how do you overcome that? So that's what I want to kind of talk about right now and then get us to talk about. Even though a lot of different people come from very different perspectives and different ideas and different walks of life and so forth, there are still very practical things that we all are doing but can continue to do, not just when we're preaching to the choir, so to speak. Sir?
I'm Clint from Occupy Bradenton.
Hi.
And one thing we've done, and it's something to think about for other Occupies, we're involved with the nation's discussion groups, and what they're doing is organizing different organizations. Presently there's representatives from a veterans organization, farm workers, from the League of Women Voters and others, and from Occupy. And we're the core group, and we're going to invite all kinds of organizations who have issues to meet together and to bring together. We need to expand Occupy beyond, it's a bunch of radical hippies, you know, smoking dope and having sex, you know. That's the thing that hurts us.
Okay.
But to touch out, and outreach is so important.
Thank you very much. You know, I know that we're doing this. I like clapping, but because I like the vibrations being put out, but I can make some mental vibrations like this. Let me sit. All right. So what I've already heard, most of the folks who are sitting here right now, I've talked to or heard talk in the last hour or two at least. So I recognize that there's some extent to which we're kind of on the same page, recognizing that, well, all right, but talking to people outside the ground, and like you were saying a little while ago, when you come up and meet somebody who's first hearing about it, or like the people who were just driving by saying, get a job, and we were saying, we have jobs, what are you talking about? That's why we're sitting over here. So, I mean, there's the intersection between, you know, pulling new people in, how do you practically do that? All right, so I kind of got it boiled down into two. I said freedom and then fear and love. In a bigger ideal situation, what I would have been able to do was show the movie V for Vendetta. We all watch it and then sit down and talk about it and make some specific points. All right, that obviously, the timing and all that kind of stuff, we couldn't work out. So what we're going to do then, or what I'm going to do about it, is just talk about a concept of freedom that I think we can all kind of grab onto, the concept of freedom, and then a concept of how we can understand ourselves and other people in terms of our own love and our own fear, and work that out practically. So that's the overview. So here's how it goes. When people think about issues of freedom, it comes a lot of different ways. People end up talking about freedom. People can talk about physical liberties, and then people can talk about mental liberties, right? Most folks who talk about freedom are going to say that both things are important. Can we agree?
Yeah, hopefully I can.
Yeah. Okay, that both physical liberty is important and mental liberty is important. All right. I think part of our biggest difficulty, and we've talked about this a little bit before, is that there are so many agencies at work intentionally keeping us mentally not free, not understanding how to think freely even within ourselves. And so this can get kind of tough and difficult, like we were saying a moment ago, when you're trying to talk to somebody who's new and then or new to your idea, so to speak, and you want to get across, all right, well, how do we get freedom of ideas? All right, so the focus of the conversation then is on the love and fear. As it turns out, I'm one of those who believes that we have, as human beings, all of us have all of our emotions and thoughts can be boiled down to one of the two sponsors. It will either be your love it's coming from or your fear that it's coming from, right? Okay, so if that's not something that you're on board with, just pretend for a little while, just so you can hear it, and then see how it works. Because again, I was talking about practicality, and so I want you to think about it, even if you're saying, oh, well, I don't know, I think there are other things. Kind of hold that at bay for a second, just to listen. All right, when you are engaging someone and going up to talk to them, if you are thinking about them in the exact same way that you think about yourself as far as a loving relationship, it makes it a little bit easier to then talk to them. Our difficulty, as we've discussed before, is us imagining that we are so very, very different from each other. Not recognizing, again, from my personal tradition, I understand that we are all extensions of the exact same thing, and that I am you and you are me, and that there's an illusion of separateness through our bodies. Does that make sense? Okay, like I said, I know we got a lot of different walks of life, a lot of different ideologies and all that kind of stuff, so I'm just trying to lay out my foundational thought about it. Okay, so if we are all, conscious or spiritual, however you want to think about it, manifestations of the same, then what connects us is our love. What ends up doing the separating then, if there are only two sponsoring thoughts, if what connects us is the love, then what separates us is our fear. Right. And that fear gets worked out a lot of different ways. And then sometimes it doesn't look like fear because, like we said, the fear is what's underlying, and you end up getting other things that come out. So, one of the things that comes out of fear that we end up seeing a great deal is anger. When people get pissed off with somebody else and they're yelling or upset or really fueled, as different from being passionate, like our friend over here was saying a little while ago, different from being passionate, but being angry. A great deal of the time, then, that anger, is it going to be coming from your love? I know you would like to think that, but is it going to be coming from your love or your fear? Right. It's going to be coming from your fear. It's going to be coming from your fear. And so when somebody else is angry or yelling at you or doing whatever, like we were saying before, how do you not internalize that? Well, the way you don't internalize it is recognizing that they are expressing right now, it looks like anger, but more deeply they're expressing their fear. Even the thing we call hate, even when somebody is said to hate somebody else, the same thing. That hate is still coming out of their fear of either being minimized themselves, fear that their own voice won't get heard, their own interests won't get heard, and that kind of thing. So a big barrier, again, is not recognizing the extensionality of ourselves with other people. If you recognize or thought of, and that's why I'm talking about this being a practical solution, if you see the other person as yourself, not just what you could have been, but really you experiencing from a different perspective. This is a big word we use a lot, perspective, but really you experience from a different perspective, and then you look at their actions and say, all right, it's either going to be coming from one or two places. So if it's coming from a place that's making me uncomfortable, or I have a problem with it, or what have you, then one of us is dealing with a fear issue, right? It's either I'm afraid of what they're about to say or how it's about to happen or what it's going to require of me, or they're afraid that I'm not going to listen or that I'm going to belittle them or something like that. So here's an example. As I told you all, I'm a teacher. And so sometimes when somebody will come in late into my class, in order to defend themselves against me saying something about them being late, they'll put on the nastiest scowl on their face they can, bring up, right? So they'll come in, scowling as nasty as possible so that I don't say anything to them and hoping. All right, so what's happening in that is, again, there's a fear that I'm going to say something or that I'm going to somehow call them out, and so they're trying to, stop what they're afraid of happening. Does that make sense? Same thing with all these things, anger, violence. I was reading the sign out here and we talk about it. Think about when somebody's pushing somebody else, or if somebody's hitting somebody or something, these violent expressions. All these are fearful expressions, worry. I can't control this person like I want, so I'm going to impress upon them some way. That's all out of the fear. So, one second. Right. So, the connecting aspect. I've heard some folks in this very circle talk that the government doesn't the people who are involved in our government don't always have the people's best interest in mind. In fact, sometimes the people who are involved in the government have their own pockets in mind, and they end up getting paid to a certain extent and end up not necessarily helping everybody and all of that, right? Okay, with that being in mind, then I've heard people say, well, don't we always need some kind of government? Or don't we always need some kind of governing outside of ourselves? No. So the idea is this. So long as you have that fearful thing that we're talking about, that is what these, what the laws are doing, separating out to try to stop you from, doing what people are afraid. But our real work is working towards all of our actions coming out of which one of those sponsoring thoughts? Love. All of our actions coming out of the love one. Because if that happens, then we will be able to evolve to that place where we don't need outside monitoring or outside laws set up and that kind of thing, because like I've heard a bunch of times, our current issues and separations and perspectives and fears that our issues aren't going to get settled and all that kind of stuff. So in the interpersonal interactions, rather I've learned in trying to convince somebody of my position, or rather than trying to say, well, your position isn't quite right because you haven't heard this, or I know you are doing that over there, but mine's more important. Like I heard somebody say a little while ago, the suffering badge or whatever, whose suffering badge is the biggest. I suffered like this, so you can't tell me nothing. Somebody was like, no, I suffered this way. All of those things are not in that communal, building, loving spirit. It's the fear that somebody's not going to, appreciate my pain in the same way.
Yeah, you've got to throw out victim. That's what you're talking about is victim. I'm a victim. You got to throw that out.
Very well could be. All right, so there's a difference between, so piggyback on what you said, there's a difference between being a victim and having a victim mentality, right? And so I think that if you internalize and hold on to the fear of it, then you end up having the victim mentality. It is the case that you can be victimized, for sure, but what you do after that victimization ends up being, I'm sorry, there was a hand around you.
I've thought a lot about these two words, fear and love. And I like to define them as much as I can. I like to analyze.
You're braver than I am.
So when I look at fear, what is fear? It's losing something, right?
It could be, right? Or it could be gaining something you don't want.
Yeah, but getting a disease or something.
You could gain, that could be something you gain that you don't want, for sure.
Right. It all seems to me like fear is a sense of lacking or incompleteness or disconnectedness. You know what I'm saying?
Let's do it this way. I like where we're going. Let's talk about love first, and then talk about fear as this antithesis.
Love as a wholeness, a unity, a interconnectedness, a unconditional respect and admiration, and gratitude. That's what I see love as.
I dig it.
So when I look at fear, especially in my life, what do I fear? I fear losing my human experience, right? I think that's the root of fear, basically death.
Of your fear?
Of the persona of consciousness, the loss of consciousness, and then the lack of, it goes on to the lack of will of that consciousness. So what I see fear as is, from my perspective, losing some aspect of love.
That's interesting.
So I see fear as a distortion of love in that respect, because when I fear for like my family or my dog or my survival or for my rights, it's because I don't want to lose that thing that I value so much in my experience. So I love that thing in my experience. So of course, there is that preserving love where I want to keep that thing in my experience, and that seems to be like an attachment love to me. You know what I'm talking about?
And can slip into fear pretty easily, right? For being afraid of losing. So in that love, or the perfection of love, there's a contentment that comes from within inside of yourself. It does not come from the outside to begin with. And thinking that it does come from the outside will make you pursue it on the outside and then fearfully not get it. If you see what I'm saying, it's definitely going to be on the end.
We're creating those distortions.
Yes.
We're buying into those distortions.
Yes.
And we have been trained to convert our love into fear.
Yes. Yes. Very much.
Let's just see love as natural and truth, and fear as a distortion of that purity. That's what I see.
Thank you. So here's what I want to do, just because I'm ready to turn the mic over. So what I take myself to have just done is laid kind of like the groundwork for this conversation that he just started for us. What I would like for us to do at this point is kind of go around and talk about our perceptions of fear and love, because my thought is that we are all here on the same team. Our team of getting people to connect to the importance of humanity, like it says on the bus over here, people of profit, right? To get to the connection of humanity and understanding us all as extensions of each other, and the development of each person is the development of myself. And doing that with a loving heart connects us. Doing it with fear divides. So given that I just say we're all on the same team, and some of the things that each and every one of you say, each and every one of us is going to say to somebody else, because we're getting a new perspective, right? When you just said that, I'm going to go out and somebody's going to say something, I'm going to go, oh yeah, I'm going to remember what you said, and then feed that right to them. So I'm pretending there's a big pot here, and he just put in a big piece for us that I would like for as many people who are willing to put another piece in as your take on our love and fear issue. In other words, how can we continue to increase our love, minimize our fear? Because at the end of the day, I'm thinking that we talk about evolving to a better society. I think that the completion of that evolution, or at least that part of that evolution, does involve the full embracing of the loving and understanding each person, the equally understanding of loving them to that extent.
I was trying to help you out, but I think I was trying to know the way you look at this. I think fear is unknown. It's like the unknown. Fear is the unknown. I guess that's really like what it all boils down to. It's like what you don't know is coming, and that's what makes you fearful.
Good.
And I feel like the difference between, and how this relates to Occupy, because I've never been here before. I'm Jamie, by the way. It's my first time. I just came from work. So I feel the difference between people who are, occupiers, or people who believe in the Occupy movement, and the people who aren't there yet or aren't, is that we have accepted the fear of the unknown. Like, we don't know what's going to happen. As much as we want to believe and hope for the best things, the future holds a big question mark. And I feel like the difference is we accept the fear because of what we love and what makes us happy, and we hope that it's going to end up doing that. Whereas the people haven't accepted the fear yet because they are still fearful. Because they've grown up in a society where you're like repeatedly, you don't know what's going to come, so you should be fearful that you should stay away. Whereas the people here are more accepting, like, oh, we don't know, but we might as well try and hope for the best. I guess, if you wanted to find out about that.
How about this? Especially being when we're talking to other folks. Not just hope for the best, but recognize that this path isn't, we can be fearful of the unknown, but we also can be fearful of what's already certain, right? And so, on the other hand, we can think of ourselves as saying, not afraid at all. Whatever ends up coming, you focus in on the love, and you focus in on the connections between us, and then I'm not worried or afraid regardless to what happens.
I'd like to piggyback on what you said. Me personally, I believe that ignorance breeds fear. Because you're ignorant to this, that, or another through your own lack of investigation, your own lack of research. You have just outside entities feeding you information about whatever, and because of this, you have a tainted perception of it, and I think that breeds fear. within itself. And like she said, it's just not knowing. And once your awareness level is brought up that, hey, that might not be accurate, there's a whole nother fear, because for me, it makes me question my own perception and my own, where do I lay my faith here, you know? It makes me question, well, how much am I sheep am I, you know? And here comes another fear of the challenge of within, for me to come outside that box, to actually start questioning these things that's been presented to me and taught as this is what's supposed to be. You know what I mean? And that within itself, that change that's going to arise just out of that awareness and that challenge is fearful within itself. And finally, it makes me question my adequacy, because as compared to those around me, or those that I deem that has overcome that. You know, I mean, these things is, and for me, like I said, I'll back up, but I believe it's not knowing through ignorance. And it's not ignorance as if you haven't received any information. It's ignorance based on you haven't investigated the information that's been presented. You know what I mean? And then when you find out differently, it then becomes personal and internal. And now I have to question my own core beliefs and my own life experiences, and have to start weighing these things. You know, someone suggested me I should do away with the whole right and wrong, and it makes sense. The whole good and bad. It makes sense, because what might be deemed good or bad to me might not be to you. You know what I'm saying? So in that fear factor for me within that is tremendous, because I feel like there's a lot of things, such as what we're discussing, having to act out of love and not operating out of fear. To me, I would deem that good, you know, but it's fearful for me just to remove that label within itself, because then I don't know, you know. It puts me in a state of not knowing, a state of ignorance, you know, and that's fearful.
I think she was first, but this is very important to me, because I feel like I feel like that fear is the only thing that can bring this movement down. And the place where I'm working is a very small Occupy, and I'm constantly presented with this, you know, is it the process or is it the product? And what I mean by that is that if I feel like that there's somebody there that's intentionally throwing up roadblocks and stuff, I get fearful that I'm going to be derailed from my purpose by these roadblocks, instead of looking at those people with love and saying that, you know, the process is more important than the product, that I have to somehow, as impossible and as fearful as I am that I'm not up to this task of loving these people and seeing them as just an extension of myself. It's really a challenge, is all I've got to say. But I just think it's so important, and I hope that I'm hoping to get a lot from, you know, you people, so that I can be up to that challenge, because I don't want to be fearful that I can't do it. That's all.
I don't remember what I was going to say originally, but I guess the way that I'm thinking about it now is, it was something that you said that triggered it, like accepting fear and understanding. I guess for me, I've been doing a lot of understanding of emotions in general, and I think instead of how you were saying not to look at things in terms of bad and good, I feel like we should just think of it as they are and use it to our advantage. Like, especially something as fear, it's a motivator in a sense, you know what I mean? To try to, I don't know really.
This is my thought about that. You can use a lot of different energies to get a lot of different things done. Okay, so I can use, well, the derivative of fear that ends up being anger. I can use anger. It's definitely a good fuel. But what ends up happening, depending on the fuel you use for getting your mission accomplished or whatever, you end up putting that stain out there as well. If my motivation is anger, then I'm going to step on people. I'm going to break things. I'm going to mash over. Sure, I'll be single-minded. Sure, I'll have the energy to go and get my things done, but I'll leave a lot of carnage, so to speak, in the wake. Whereas in if I let that sponsoring thought be the love, it's not this. It doesn't look the same. It doesn't follow the same kind of a process, and it also doesn't seem as direct, so to speak, as the fear route. But that fear, again, it slips into these other things that become much more dangerous. And so, is it that I'm saying that we shouldn't recognize it, or that it's not perfectly okay to be afraid? I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that. I'm talking about behaving and decision making and thinking out of that fear. It's a big difficulty. Do I feel afraid? Often that happens. I feel afraid. But what happens with that recognition, it's like a signal that goes off to say, hey, look into yourself and see what's going on here, buddy. That kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, fear, most fears I think are unhealthy fears. A healthy fear is basically, when I'm endangered by something, and then when it triggers the fight or flight, the anger or run. And, there's certain situations in your life where that comes up, and it's normal, but I think that I'll speak for myself, I can very easily pervert that fear based on the loss of gaining, the loss of something that I have, whether it be material or the emotional connections or money, or well, that's material, but a loss of losing something, or the loss of getting something I think that I deserve. And the reality, I mean, for me, one of the more common reactions to that, and it's different for a lot of people, but is in the fight or flight, is anger. And generally, if I respond to one of these, what I would call false fears in anger, I actually create more problems for myself in the anger than what going through the actual situation would be. And one thing that I have learned, and I probably have forgotten it as many times as I've learned it, is that when I'm faced in one of these fearful situations, not the one where somebody's going to punch me in the face, but the ones that I create in my head, when I face those situations, I often come out a better person for it. And that is how I think you can embrace the situation in love. That, wow, I just felt fear, but this means great things are going to come to me, to go through it. And to relate it into Occupy, my first desire to come here, I had fear on what kind of dangers I could be putting myself in. But I've walked through it, and I've gotten tons of rewards, and I hope that these efforts can bring rewards to my family and my society around me. But if I just sit home and wallow in that fear and run from it, and everybody else does too, it doesn't happen. So walk through it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, the last 3 or 4 people have spoken for me, but I would like to make the point that I truly believe, I know that fear and hatred are, that anger and hatred are based in fear. About things being lost, but I think that often what happens, as I believe has happened, is that people in the world have known for a long time something's not right, and there's been this free-floating anxiety, this dread, fear, but then other people have stepped in and labeled that for them, usually as the other, terrorists, undocumented immigrant, whatever. They just decide and they put it there, and people grab it because, this is the answer to resolving my fear. And it obviously isn't. I don't think it is. But fear really is part of being alive. Its purpose is to signal us that something's wrong. That's why we evolved that way. And then once we identify really what we're afraid of, I think you were saying, then we decide, how do I respond, as you were saying. So, but the idea that, because I know some people who say they're never afraid, and I just think that probably they, well, or that, that it's not helpful to not be afraid. It's more helpful to say, I'm afraid this is examine it, what's going on, and then make the choice, as you said, given that information about myself. So, not always easy to do, as others have pointed out, but yeah. But fear is real. I mean, it can be real. It doesn't have to be neurotic or whatever, and it's easily manipulated.
I haven't heard from this. Yes.
To follow what she's doing, especially when it comes to the other and that concept, I think fear and love both based on the level of connectiveness to everything around you, like what you were saying earlier. And I think that a lot of people associate and get fear because of loss of identity, like what he was saying, sort of, and that identity translates into the reality that they have around them. And so when you have people who aren't exactly like you, or when you have things that are shaking up your reality that you may not have expected, or that could possibly happen, or whatever, you kind of stay in fear of that that reality changing without your control, because it all comes back to your control over your surrounding and yourself. And I think that if people realize that everything is together and everything kind of is connected, that kind of releases that control, so that you understand that there really is no control. Everything's kind of just going as it is, and I think that kind of makes people more able to let go and love more, and not have to worry about that constant fear of losing their reality and their identity, because you realize that like stuff like that is kind of illusionary. It's not real. I mean, it is real. It's obviously, I mean, we're really here, but it kind of opens up another scape of existence to those people.
Is there a stack?
No, free fall.
Yeah, I mean, I think you know, that really gets at the nature of a lot of what's going on. I mean, in order to, well, Vincent gave me this great shirt, and I think it really hits the point. I mean, if we're, you know, the mechanism of ego is kind of what drives the tendency of self-preservation, and that's cool and everything on an individual scale, but when you want to start doing something that's on a larger scale that you need a community for, you have to really give up a lot of these self-serving tendencies to start serving others. And so when you give up this mechanism, there is explicit ego loss involved, and that's a terrifying thing, because on a biological level, that's the mechanism that, you know, animalistically keeps us alive. And so there's an inherent fear that comes with any kind of release or ego loss, period. But you know, like Brittany was saying, but that's prerequisite for building a community, because you have to give up a little bit of autonomy to essentially to serve as fuel to burn to feed this larger collective organism. And you know, because when you cooperate with people, when you synchronize your behavior with people, that's giving up autonomy. I'm no longer entirely determined by what it is that I personally want. Like, if I want to cooperate with someone, we have to synchronize according to each other. And so now my behavior is determined not just entirely by my wants and needs, but in order to coordinate with this person, I've got to give up that element. And so when people give up a bit of ego, that lends you know, freedom to act collectively on a larger scale. But it does involve this sacrifice of this really deep, primal, animalistic thing. And that's absolutely terrifying, especially if people have never really experienced that. And so it's hard. It's hard for a lot of people, because I mean, a lot of people come in and they have their ideas of how they've been envisioning how the world needs to be for a long time, and then when you end up coming into a situation where you have to compromise that with other people's visions, it's a really oftentimes traumatic thing to encounter. But it's the most important thing is to learn and get comfortable, you know, giving up this part of yourself, because that's how you build a community, is by everyone giving up a little bit of themselves to make this other larger thing.
In fact, you ain't Ralph, right? You are Ralph. To piggyback on exactly what Ralph said, I think that this is part of our human process, to be sure. And I think that going through that process of stepping out, seeing yourself possibly as an individual, but then recognizing that the greater is greater, and then you give up that small little bit so that you can become greater through we. I think that's dead on. I love it 100%.
Yeah, I was just thinking, you were saying earlier, you said something about how could we minimize this fear. And I was just thinking that in order to minimize fear, me personally, I have to be more accepting, because I have to realize that there's more outside of just me in my life experiences and in my interpretations and perspectives. And in that, I have to accept that there are others, and theirs may be different than mine. And I have to be open enough not only to share mine, but to receive yours. And in doing that, then the anger has to stem from lack of acceptance and an unwillingness to be open. It's like I'm going to sit right here in my box and be rigid and refuse to even acknowledge that your way or your perception might be feasible in my life. You know, and that's just something quick that came to me when you said that.
Yeah, and then
okay, so basically, this is just to touch on what everyone's been saying, of course, but we are a collective organism, right? Not only conceptually, but there is an actual physical matrix of information that communicates between organisms, minds, and hearts and whatnot, because we are electromagnetic beings, not only physical beings. And as a collective consciousness, or for some people it would be collective unconscious because they're not conscious of conscious and what they're building upon in the first place, because we're all building upon each other's perceptions of life. And I feel that when people cling to illusion, they bring the whole collective down, because they're really stopping progress. You know, like you said in the beginning, we are all a collective organism building upon a foundation of a concept, so that we can have a greater awareness of our own individual experiences of love and fear. You know, two categories of myriad of other experiences, emotionally, mentally, and basically, what I think the biggest problem people are having right now, as a student, I see like what kids are going through as like teenagers morphing into adults. Like that's probably the most unstable part of someone's life, when they're finally getting a grip on their ego. And now, oh, we're becoming a collective organism, so now we have to trash that ego that we've been building like throughout our teens. So I've seen people like go through basically hell because of their own perceptions and how much they cling to those and whatnot. And like we just said, love kind of takes away your free will a little bit, but that's for a greater efficiency of free will, you know, so that everyone can create and build together synchronously, not I don't really like the randomness of everyone pursuing their own desires. Like, I don't even like the education system, how it says, pursue a career that you desire, you know, what you want to do. And I really like that, because, of course, we all have tendencies to be better at things and be more interested in different categories. But let's look at it from this perspective. What can we give to the community that would fulfill our sense of purpose at the same time, and fulfill our sense of creativity and compassion and exploration of consciousness, exploration of experience. So what I was basically saying earlier is that fear is non-existent. It is an artificial construct that humans have created for themselves, basically. And I know it seems like an animalistic thing, but I think we have empowered it with mental concepts and whatnot. When we really look at nature, nature is always coming together. When we saw prokaryotes and unicellular organisms, they came together as eukaryotes, and the eukaryotes came together as multicellular organisms, and they formed a greater ego, a greater concept of self, right? As a more supreme being. Because from my perspective, the supreme being isn't out in some other galaxy or in the center of the universe. It's here, you know? It's the whole, and I feel like the supreme being is merely coming together and forming a greater concept of self through going through that illusion of duality and loss, because I feel like we never lost anything. We just gained experiences that taught us more about how grateful we should really be in the first place for the experience that we have right now.
Oh, I was just thinking about that. I guess I'm trying to get it in my mind because it's, you know, early evolution, that analogy, and wasn't contending with the way that the natural order has been subverted and distorted, just environmentally, for example, and so that is there a natural progression of evolution even on a one-cell level now because of how things have been toxicized in my mind. So that's what I was thinking about. But I also, I mean, if this group has suggestions, would like to hear, you know, for me, consensus process is like the perfect way. I mean, to me, that doesn't feel like anything's being taken away when that actually happens, where every voice is heard, and things are discussed, ideas changed, etc. But that doesn't always happen, and I'll just speak for, you know, the GAs that I've attended in a number of places. Doesn't always happen. And so, you know, how people have overcome that, because then it is when it starts. I see factions feeling like their voice is being taken away, or, you know, their identity is threatened, or mainly because they seem to be being dismissed, which is not what I think this is about. So, I mean, if people have those ideas of how to deal with the generation of the fear, I mean, because I see the fear being generated in a vehicle that I see as producing love, the consensus process. So.
And going back to what you said a second ago about the electromagnetic vibrations and all that good stuff, and then talking about how it is possible for groups of folks to bring down the overall vibration, but just like that, it is also possible for groups of folks to raise the vibration. And so that's and so part of our raising the vibration is not talking about it being lowered, but talking about the fact that we are raising it and bringing more people to do just that. Exactly what you're doing. Well, I didn't have any more than that, so I was thinking that maybe just so for the sake of, you know, closure, so to speak, if there's one or two more folks who want to do a wrap up, I don't feel like I'm going to do the wrap up. So one or two folks want to go to finish us off, and then like I said, I'm about vibrations, and then I want a big hand clap after that.
Even though I agree that we shouldn't even acknowledge the distortions that have been created and seen as truth in the past, I'd like to name like a few emotional experiences that are merely a distortion of that love that we talked about. Like anger, for instance, that's a self-preservation thing where you are using brute force to either protect your will or protect your body or protect something that you love, right? It's preserving love. But I could see it transmuted into a passion to prepare to maybe not preserve that which naturally needs to be transmuted into something else, but help this thing that we are trying to preserve transform into something that would preserve itself naturally as a more harmonious entity with the forces that are seeking to eliminate it.
All right.
It's really abstract.
It's funny you should say that, because what somebody just told me today is it is going down. It's not that it's going down. Part of our conversation is our feeling that we are increasing, right? And so we keep rolling. Now, it's not like an if, we are, and part of what we're doing through our love is bringing more people on board to, you know, expand that situation and do our part in the I guess the manifestation of that. But the manifestation is manifesting, right? So listen, I guess what I want to say to then finally to close it, and I'm gonna clap because I like it, is to try to keep it in the front of our minds when we interact with ourselves, but definitely with other people. That the other person is an extension of you from a different perspective, and that our ultimate goal is to love them and not be afraid, even if they're spitting out fear.
for sure speakers coming out of 4. It's Michelle Raywinkle of Vasalinda. She's a Florida State representative. She's going to talk to us about how to effectively communicate with your legislators. That's about an hour from now. There was a tentative speaker around 3. Doesn't seem like that's happening, so our next speaker will be at 4.